Get started. Thank you and welcome all to this evening's special board meeting. Oh, I guess we do. I guess we will. Do you mind taking the roll, please? We'll go ahead and get started. And Ms. Lewis, if you would take the roll for us, that would be great.
Yes.
Present.
Ms. Lewis is here. Reverend Tias.
Present.
Jackie. Here. Mrs. Williams. Present. Dr. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Davis. Here. President Ross. Here.
So thank you. We do have a quorum though, but have not. So may I get a motion to approve this evening's agenda, please? Let's move by Ms. Davis, I believe, made the motion, and Ms. Williams supported.
Who supported?
Ms. Williams. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Do we have any public comment this evening? Don't believe we do. Okay, we will go ahead and move forward with our facilities plan update, and Dr. Roby will go ahead and start that for us.
So good evening, everyone. Glad to see you on this cold November Monday. So what we're going to do, this is really our work session to kind of ground us in the work we've done thus far and to make sure that we're all still on the same page, and if there are questions or things that people would like to see between now and when we're asking for our board to vote, that we're able to answer those questions. And so just a quick overview. This process has been years in the making. It's been aligned to our district strategic plan, and we have engaged the voice of our board, the voice of our district staff, teachers, leaders, and also our scholars. And then we also have engaged the voice of our internal community and well as external community. And how we define that is internal community has been parents, those who have direct connection to our schools, and then external might be people who don't have either students in the district at this time or maybe connected in a way through work or some other capacity.
Will you advance the slide for the viewers?
Huh?
Are you going to advance the slide for the viewers? I didn't mean to cut you off. I just know people may be watching. Oh, I apologize. I apologize.
I will advance.
Yes.
I will advance.
My apologies. Thank you.
We've been really intentional about gathering voice, and I'm really excited to share that in the time that we have done this process, it's been over 6,000 different voices, and so we really started to actively engage voice the week that we began school, which was the last week of August. And so to gather voice between late August through early November speaks to the work of this board, the work of our district and school leadership, and the engagement of our community. And so I want to make sure that I, acknowledge that this has not been just kind of something that we have taken lightly. We really have tried to be very intentional and then also take a broad swath across our community. We've held approximately 40 different meetings when you include lunch and learns, focus groups, town halls. Many of our board members, all of our board members have attended at least one or more of those sessions. All right. To advance the slide. So this has been.
Excuse me, Professor.
So just kind of talking about what our process has been, and again, this has really been a year in the making where we've started to kind of really be very intentional. If you recall, in December of last year, I did individual one-on-ones with each of our board members just to get a general sense of where you were at, if there are things that you specifically wanted to make sure that we were included in the process, and how would you like to move forward. After collecting that information, we compiled it, and then we decided that we needed to kind of have a comprehensive process. An ad hoc facilities committee group was formed to start to begin to study this, and then in the spring of earlier this year, we began kind of meeting on a regular basis, and then we decided as a board, or you all decided as a board, to create a decision-making process and criteria, which I'll unpack in a few minutes. Earlier this spring, we had our first board retreat where we got the history of our district, an overview of kind of the patterns and the other things that we've studied over the last couple of years, and a history of our buildings. From that, the board decided that in addition to the ad hoc committee work group, we needed to have, an ad hoc committee, we also needed to have an ad hoc work group where we were kind of getting into the details of what the processes are. And that group has been meeting pretty consistently since late June, early July of this year, every single week. Every Thursday morning we meet. And then through that process, from March through November, we had the engagement of our district SPICE team. There became conversations around how do we engage the broader community, and those were the surveys, town halls, lunch and learn, both internal and external voice. Through this process, we also decided, the board decided to have their grounding around the equity statement that you all came up with, and to engage our Plant Moran Cressa with helping us kind of build our own capacity around what this work has looked like. In October of 2022, we began identifying and confirming the goals of what we expected for our facilities master plan, as well as the timeline that wanted to be included. We also provided some stakeholder engagement and developed a consensus of what to be included, which will be the 7 recommendations that you all came up with. And then we'll get into that a little bit later. Since that time, November, we've had an election. We've completed, like I said, over 40 different gatherings between town halls, lunch and learns, and we're hoping that through this process that there's information that people feel comfortable with moving forward towards a recommendation by December of this year. All right, so the following on this screen are the 10 criteria that this board has decided that were the priority areas of how they would make some decisions. Ensuring, one, that we incorporate realignment of staffing, and this will help to address some of the shortages, but then also looking at scholar outcomes, making sure that we have improved scholar opportunities, investing in spaces around our school environments, and to strengthen our teaching and learning experiences, making sure that all of this work is aligned to the strategic plan, being financially good stewards of how we're using our resources, looking for future growth opportunities, being creative and adaptive use of our facilities, looking at our facilities as an asset versus something that does not benefit the district long term. One of the other priorities is in supporting scholars, family, and voice of our staff. Always making sure that we have an emphasis around safe, healthy, and accessible facilities. Talked a little bit about the community land benefit, and then prioritizes ownership of buildings and land long term. And so we've talked about that language of holding onto land into perpetuity. And again, I'm just providing kind of some of the foundations. And so what you have now, there are 7 recommendations that the district and the board have worked together. These are the areas of impact, influence, sustain, and what both President Ross and Treasurer Shockey will do is walk through the recommendations that you all have come forward with, and then at the end we'll make sure that if there are questions or things that we want to wordsmith, that we're able to do that, and then to move forward with next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thank you very much. So as Dr. Roby mentioned, we're going to walk through the 7 recommendations that we're bringing to the board, and they are categorized in the 4 different phases. That first phase is impact, and you'll see in your packet as well as on the screen the first 2 recommendations for that, and the next 2 will be on the next slide. They're for an impact. But the first bullet there, as you can see, the impact, and I don't know if I'll call it a definition, but the descriptive piece for impact is consolidating GRPS facilities by relocating educational and support programs to provide environments that do allow for scholars and staff to excel in alignment with the strategic and academic plan. So that first recommendation in that regard is to ensure sustainability and align with the strategic plan by aiming for an average of 75% utilization across elementary and middle schools. I should say an emphasis on elementary and middle schools by 2032. So with that, it's important to keep in mind, though, that the 75% utilization goal is not looked to be achieved simply through consolidation or closure or anything of that nature. I mean, that is one element, but obviously as we move through this and when we talk about the word innovate, part of this reaching this goal will be programming that brings more students to the district. So obviously enrollment strategy will also be a part of factoring into this 75% utilization. So, and again, keep in mind that our focus for this facilities master plan is on the elementary and middle grade levels, but of course we do have buildings in the district that are at the secondary level that we'll be doing some programming and things of that nature to also contribute to this district-wide 75% utilization average. But again, the focus for this current facilities master plan is specifically on the elementary and middle school grade levels. I don't know if Ms. Shockey may want to add anything to that.
I guess I would just reiterate that the 75% utilization is meant as a district-wide average, so not individual schools, but as we look at the entire district, that's what that figure is measuring. And it's general classroom use, right? So it's not, what is the capacity or the potential occupancy of a building. It's really about looking at actual classrooms and students in those classrooms.
And so that recommendation 2 for impact is enrollment and utilization rates to be assessed annually to ensure that the facilities master plan, strategic plan, and academic plan implementations are improving measurable strategic outcomes. So this assessment piece is real key, just to really underscore the real intentionality that this work is going to be done, and the annual review to make sure that this work is actually hitting the marks and the goals that we are hoping for. So this is not necessarily a one-time recommendation and then off we go. This is definitely going to be an iterative process with us being really intentional to make sure that the outcomes that we're looking for are being achieved on both a process basis as well as long-term basis. So again, just want to underscore that there's some real intentionality behind this work. So I don't know, anything you want to share on that one, Ms. Shockey?
Yeah. I guess I'll just emphasize what I think is important about this recommendation, which really is that, as we look back in time over the transformation plan and that experience, we know that the state of the school district evolves. We know that the city evolves. We know that policy and lawmaking evolves. And so this is just it is our ability to see that has happened, and that we do want not only for the district to have the ability to come back and make changes, but also a nod to what I know is a future recommendation, which is community and stakeholder involvement in these decisions. So really a chance for us to look together at are the decisions we're making having a measurable outcome, and do we need to change things over time? So this just is stating that clearly, that is our intention.
So on to recommendation 3, which speaks about the relocation of scholars and staff being implemented to preserve programs, prioritize access, and improve learning environments into our existing neighborhood and theme schools. I think this piece is, at least the way that I sort of categorize it in my own mind, is we're being intentional by quadrant to make sure that we have thorough educational opportunities throughout the city. That leveraging of that will be increasing programming, or I should say integrating programming into our neighborhood schools that may all have a theme to it as well. So again, just really trying to be real intentional to not just preserve programs that are working well, but again, prioritize access throughout the city so all of our scholars have opportunity to some quality and innovative programming in their current or soon to be neighborhood school, and again, underscoring those with some theme at each neighborhood school level. And Dr. Roby, I apologize, I'm asking Ms. Shock if she'd like to add something, but of course, feel free to clarify anything as well.
Sure, I would add for recommendation 3, what we are doing, or the plan is, if this is approved, these recommendations are approved, then beginning in January of 2023, we are going to talk about, again, how do we align programming pieces so that we're looking at pre-K through 12 at all schools and to ensure that there are appropriate pathways so that we remove one of those barriers that we've talked about previously of our tiered system, going back to our strategic plan around making sure that all schools are viable options. And our team has already started to work through what are programmatic pieces that we want to have, and then what supports will staff need, what trainings will people need as we are looking at improving the overall pre-K-12 structure so that we have a strong articulation no matter which school young people are choosing for their family, or people are choosing for their children.
Any clarifications from you, Ms. Shockey? Good.
So this recommendation to me is how I see our responsiveness to the needs of our constituents, which we have heard over and over for the last, I don't know, as long as I've been serving. So this is a plan that helps us meet the needs of our scholars, our families, and our staff. It's a plan that allows us to ensure that the custodial needs of buildings are met. It's a plan that allows us to make sure that there aren't subbing shortages in our buildings. This recommendation allows us to grow departments within buildings so that there can be collaboration and support. I just see this as being such an incredible way for us to best support the needs of our district.
Thank you. And the last recommendation in phase 1 of impact is recommendation 4 here. That just speaks to being responsive and transparent with our community by producing a facilities master plan calendar that includes continual stakeholder engagement and communication milestones on a regular basis. So, I think this really is the process thus far, in my opinion, has been responsive and transparent with our community. Dr. Roby laid out the maybe almost hundreds, maybe not hundreds, but at least dozens of engagement opportunities that have been put before the public thus far, and that will continue. I guess an example of our responsiveness, if you may recall, when we first began to go into this work in depth, one of the things that as a board that we put on the table was possibly building a new performing arts center, a standalone performing arts center. However, based on feedback that we've gotten from pretty much all aspects of our community, our scholars, our parents, and other community stakeholders, that does not seem to be a community priority, and that has been removed from consideration at this point. Of course, we will look to do some things to maybe bring some of our auditoriums into, for lack of a better word, the 21st century. But the point being is that the plan we've been responsive to things we've heard from the community. So that's just an example. Of course, there'll be some other things as we continue to go through community engagement that'll continually shape, what we actually do. So that's just one of the recommendations, that we continue to have this commitment to transparency and responsiveness to our community. I don't know if either one of you want to. Yeah. So that closes out the 4 recommendations under the impact phase. And keep in mind, the impact phase is the first 1 to 3 year sort of piece, to really setting the foundation for moving some of this work forward. And I guess at this point, any questions or comments on those recommendations before I move to the invest or innovative phase? Dr. Flores.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to recommendation number 1, the language in it, and suggest that we insert where it says across. I think we should put in there across the district, because Ms. Schottky did underscore the fact that this applies to an overall district calculation of using 75% utilization as a standard measure, and I think we need to capture that concretely in language so that there's no confusion and that we don't forget, because I think that someone would very easily say, well, this school over here didn't make 75%. Why aren't we closing that one instead of the one that we're facing in my neighborhood?
Yeah.
And so I think that our intent needs to be deliberate there and clear.
Yeah, also that's a good point, because I'm not sure if it means that 75% utilization across the district and an emphasis on elementary and middle school. Or are you saying that will be 75% utilized?
Yeah.
elementary, middle school.
It's 75% across the district with an emphasis at this point to work towards that by emphasizing elementary and middle schools, though. But it is across the district. So I think Dr. Flores's point is very appropriate. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the first four recommendations? Please.
Yeah, I have a couple. I think that recommendation number 4, so the transparent community calendar, et cetera, has to be the most important one. Otherwise, because I think that all of these recommendations leaves a pretty wide range of options that can chosen. We can get to the utilization rate by closing high school or middle school or whatever that isn't full, even though that may not be the best decision, but it would get at the utilization rate. I think that for those of us, and I know that anybody involved in school district work, you suggest closing a building, changing a building, and there's a lot of community feedback. And we'll get a lot more feedback when somebody's building is going to get closed than possible future. So I think that if that's out there clearly and we're willing to listen and make alternative plans, then I think that that's the most important part of this. And then I think it makes the other 3 okay, because then if there is a wide consideration and the public has a chance to respond. I do think that this clarity is, this transparency and clarity is really important. For instance, your example, Raynard, about the Performing Arts Center, I heard someone who was knowledgeable last week refer to the fact that through the community engagement process, we learned that GRPS isn't interested in investing in the performing arts. And I had to clarify and say, no, we learned that we're not interested in investing in a standalone performing arts center. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't also invest in the performing arts spaces in the existing schools.
Absolutely.
So this recommendation number 4 gets at that more clearly, and I think it allows for clarity to come about. So I think that gives me the ability to vote for all of it without getting a lot more specifics.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
To that point, Dr. Baker, I will say that through this process, I think being responsive and transparent, it's messaging multiple different ways. And what I have learned, even from a communication standpoint, is you have to repeat, for most adults, you have to hear it 7 times before it kind of like it sticks. And so just being really clear what the messaging is and being, communicating in multiple different ways.
Is that why you gave a broad introduction before you started PowerPoint?
Yes, to frame it, yes. Because I think, again, we want to make sure that we are transparent and people understand the why and continue to bring them along through this process, which will be at times kind of messy, and because this is, a major kind of shift in how we are proposing how we do our business. And so, just continually kind of coming back out and saying, here's where we are, this is what we've understood, here's where we are, this is what we've understood, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I think for number 3, what was I going to say? You had mentioned quadrants, and I don't see it listed there, but it would be important to see. I think when people look at themselves, they may see their neighborhood or where they're at in a particular side of the city. Does that need to be defined, meaning that we put some aspect of quadrants in there, or is it going to, teeter-totter between some neighborhoods? The other is being real clear about where we see the growth in student numbers, meaning number of families that are moving into our communities that have children and those kinds of things as we're looking at enrollment, trying to be a little bit more specific about what are our enrollment goals. Are we looking at 10% growth? And obviously that challenges us to work at that if that's one of the goals or something like that. So not just growth, but some intentionality about where that growth is, where you see it, how you're going after it. But for number 3 for me was you had mentioned quadrants, and I think people are going to be interested in seeing, okay, so how does that figure out in where I live, and then typically the feeder school process, and how that might change if my school isn't 75%, and it may have to change, close, or other.
Yeah, I can understand those points. I would say, and I'll only speak for myself in this moment. I think I would definitely consider some language that maybe doesn't speak to quadrants specifically, but at least gives a greater sense of the spirit in which at least I spoke as an individual. I think that's something that we can definitely discuss in our work group meeting on Thursday. As far as the specificity on the enrollment goals, I think there may be a few challenges with that are not wholly under our control. So I think I'd be hesitant to try to sort of tie the district's hands to meet a specific enrollment goal, simply because a lot of that is dependent on, everything from birth rates to what's going on from a economic standpoint in Grand Rapids and whether we're attracting new families to the community as a whole. Just a lot of things that come into play with that. I don't know if we would really have the appetite to get into some real specificity as far as how and a number or percentage of families. I do think, obviously, a big part of this is developing some innovative programming or placing innovative programming into some of the current locations to attract families who are already, in those locations. But beyond that, I think it might be a bit difficult, at least from my perspective. But of course, I'll allow Dr. Rober to speak to that.
So under recommendation number 2, we haven't, because we haven't built out kind of fully what our plan is, but we understand that this is a very comprehensive, one is kind of feeds into another, right? And so looking at kind of like our academic programmatic pieces, how will that drive enrollment? And then also we've been talking about, as we're building out this recommendation, what are the specific strategies that the district is going to engage in from a very intentional, strategic point to say, we have 14,500 students as of fall of 2023. Do we need to set an enrollment goal of 10% by fall of 2025? I mean, and so just to have something to shoot for, and then even so, do we want to even drill down into what part of the city or what programs? And so, and then how are we kind of taking our data where we have more students in parts of the city, going back to that quadrant. And again, this is kind of drilling in and being very intentional and focused to say, out of this portion of the city, this percentage of students have selected elsewhere. We're going to target them very differently and have a different marketing strategy. And so we've been talking about some of those components, but we want to build that out in a very systematic way and then have some goals around that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on these first 4 recommendations? Before we move. Okay. So we'll move to phase 2, invest, and keep in mind this is sort of a 3-year plus time frame. But invest is the descriptive language there is reimagining state-of-the-art school environments that provide for greater scholar opportunity and equitable outcomes, and align capital requirements with this vision to make a positive financial impact on the district. And the only recommendation we have in this phase 2 speaks to the continuation of funding for the implementation of the facilities master plan. So that just means that there in November 2023, people can anticipate a capital program associated with maintaining our current bond level, or I better should say a no new tax bond proposal would probably be the best way to frame that. So we have an opportunity to come before the voters to maintain our current millage rate. So with that, there would be a note, there would be no new tax to fund some of these projects, but we would need to come to the voters to get that reauthorized or reapproved. And again, so again, I just wanted to point that out, that that is the only recommendation we have here for Phase 2 investors, to maintain our current mills rate to fund some of the opportunities that'll come with the facilities master plan. I don't know, Ms. Shockey, Dr. Roby, if you want to. Oh, all right. Anything on that recommendation for phase 2 as far as the bond? Any comments, questions? Okay, we'll move on to phase 3, Innovate. Innovate is also a 3+ years sort of piece, and the descriptive language there is collaborate on opportunities within the district that will allow us to create community to thrive and grow. Property will be prioritized for community benefit. And as you can see for recommendation 6, you see that chart there, that some of the feedback we got from the engagement piece when we talk about community benefit is considering things like affordable housing, staff housing, parks, green space, things of that nature. So when we talk about using district assets for community benefit, those are some of the categories that are being considered. And we would do that through seeking partnerships to utilize our vacated schools and sites once program replacements are identified. So, but again, we definitely want to underscore that as a district, we will be looking to maintain ownership of said property. And the reason for that is, of course, not only is it an asset from a sustainability perspective, but also gives us opportunity. Hopefully, once we reach that 75%, we will need to grow the district and add other facilities to house new scholars. So again, it's important for us to maintain the property for those purposes. Any questions or comments on that, or Ms. Shockey or Dr. Roby, you want to add something to that?
I would just add, I feel like this is the recommendation that is the visioning of this board, and our ability to look forward not just over the next 4 years or 10 years, but well beyond that, so that a board in 40 years looks back and said they were thinking about us, right? They were good stewards because they knew that this land and these properties matter to the school district and to our scholars, and that there would be a future for them. So this is where I just think we have a really powerful opportunity to say that in this way.
Dr. Baker?
Yeah, just I agree with this. And I think that the way that Ms. Shockey just phrased it, that we thought of the future board and the stewards. I do think that we need to be careful with the way we maintain ownership, to the extent that it does not, owning it, providing housing, maintaining parks, et cetera, does not get in the way of our overall strategic plan as a school district. So so that'll be, I think that's a question that's going to come up again with the next slide. But how do we do that in a way that's that doesn't distract from what our job is, which is teaching children?
Roger, makes sense. Any other comments?
No,
questions? Yes.
again, for me, would be some of these recommendations too, in terms of revenue. How will that bring revenue to the district, whether it's affordable housing or staff housing or even park and green space? How is that going to bring revenue, or some aspect of that as we consider that, or you consider that? So,
Well, that's potentially dicey, particularly if any bond dollars are used for any renovations or any sort of if it contributes to what could potentially be that revenue source, because with the bond dollars, we're restricted from revenue gaining opportunities, leveraging bond dollars to do so. So, a lot of that, I guess, would be TBD, to be determined. That is, as far as if there would be any revenue sort of capturing on an annual basis or anything of that nature. Of course, we have our PNC folks that I categorize that. Yeah. So again, not saying that there would not be, but there definitely would not be if bond dollars contributed to any building or renovation of that particular space.
And that part of the conversation, I guess, right?
But that is something that that we have discussed and can't do anything but give a nod to Ms. Grant here for ensuring that we kept that on the table for conversation for sure. Yeah. Any other questions or comments about that recommendation 6? Okay, well, that'll move us to the final phase of phase 4, and this is work that will begin as early as 2023. But the descriptive language there is to manage vacant assets to improve fiscal ownership while maintaining ownership. So with that, the recommendation is to reduce our current operating costs and resource efficiencies by leveling the current vacant building that is Kensington and divesting in Alexander in fiscal year 2023. As you know, a lot of this conversation got started when we looked at the economic output that we have for some of our underutilized buildings, and Kensington being one that's been, as they say, mothballed or shuttered for years, that we're continually incurring costs to maintain. So the idea at this point would be to simply level that building, at least that would be the recommendation, to level that building and divest in Alexander. And what we mean by that is identifying some alternate uses for Alexander that would, again, nothing's on the table at this point, but again, how could that building be repurposed as early as 2023? And again, but the key point with all of that, we would look to maintain property ownership, again, with future assets decisions to be considered as we move forward. So for phase 4, sustain, that's the only recommendation. Dr. Roby, Ms. Shockey, anything you'd like to offer on that?
Nothing more for me.
Any questions or anything, comments on phase 4 and recommendation 7?
So specifically with Kensington, so we will vote, this will be our vote in December on this. Will that vote mean that we have decided to level Kensington?
That vote will mean that this board has decided to accept these recommendations, and one of which would be a leveling of Kensington. Whether that means that January 1st the wrecking balls will be there, I don't think that, but yes, that would be a decision that this board will be making.
So I would suggest that since recommendation 4 was a transparent calendar, that we would make, that we would communicate our intention of voting on that fairly public quickly. Because I think that, because we have had people approach us about what to do with that space, and I think that that is a bit more specific, that will impact current community interests. I haven't heard any reason not to follow with this recommendation, but I don't have any ideas about what to do with that building, and some people do in the community. So I think it's very important that we make that communication public quickly, and that I think that that's going to generate some community response. And then second with that, I mean, maybe we want to discuss that, but also I like to have a little more information about what divesting in Alexander actually means, because it seems like a pretty broad set of investing in it. Could mean selling it, it could mean a whole bunch of stuff. So
yeah, and I think, and I don't know if Dr. Roby is at liberty to discuss anything that maybe has been floated out there from folks outside the district, because as you said, there's obviously interest, but I think the district stance at this point is understanding that for GRPS educational purposes, Alexander is not a building that we're considering doing anything with at this point, but what should be done with it, and none of that has been determined, that's for sure. So I think hence the broadness for divesting, because there have been no decisions on that, and I don't even think there's any strong considerations of anything in particular. But again, I'll allow Dr. Roby to clarify anything if I'm just unaware.
So two different things, with respect to Dr. Baker's comments around making sure public is informed. One of our goals is, again, this is kind of the work session to ensure that, one, things haven't changed for people, to kind of have that discussion. And then if not or so, whatever the wordsmithing or the finessing of information that needs to take place, and then we will certainly communicate this out. We have a scheduled public hearing for next Monday, where the 7 recommendations, or whatever iterations of the 7 recommendations are in play, will be communicated to say, here are the 7 things. People are invited to come and offer feedback or commentary around that, and then the board will have 2 more weeks after that to kind of engage the public to see if it does change, and then that December 5th date. With respect to Alexander, there has been several inquiries around Alexander. As you recall, because the building itself has sat empty or not of school use for several years, and so to repurpose it back into a school building with the level of
Financial
renovation
commitment,
is
yeah.
not fiscally appropriate for us at this point. Yet, going back to some of those other criteria around the board's 10 kind of measures of how they want to do it, then to kind of be clear to say, as we are divesting in Alexander, here are some choices of what may be some options. And so whatever that looks like, then to kind of engage the community or the city or housing or whatever the board decides to say, this is what we're willing to do, and to see, kind of to build that process out.
So then voting for this would mean that there's an expectation of this group of people to be expecting next year's board to consider what to do with Alexander.
Yes.
Following those 10.
Yes.
Following those guys,
Yes.
which makes it, and that's helpful. The Kensington thing, I think that we need to get on, so.
Understood. Thank you.
So it would be my comment then, though, that we can word this better. So just saying that we will retain ownership of Alexander while exploring how to serve the community, exploring how to serve, our families and students in a way that is not used for, a schoolhouse, but something else. But because that divesting
Yeah.
is interesting. And that's all I have right now.
And so going back, Ms. Grant, to kind of just, and these are not put in any sort of priority order, these are just the things of what are the board's consideration of how they'll make a decision. And then in addition to that, if you recall, you all created a policy about a year ago around kind of how you would entertain offers, for lack of a better term, of when people were interested, or companies or other entities were interested in space. And so that would have to come into play too, to kind of start to unpack some of those layers.
Go ahead, sir.
I would like to underscore Dr. Baker's points about, our recommendation, and then engaging communities, specific stakeholders in those respective communities, especially with Kensington, where we're talking about the recommendation of demolition. And that we make every effort possible, and I know that that's probably in your plan. It's my assumption that it is, that communications are active, and that we engage with community organizations that may have some opinion on the matter, and that we do the same with Alexander, and that there is full transparency, and that is our best spirit. That is our best foot forward.
Agreed. And I think we want to go in the spirit of being transparent. This active board will kind of make these recommendations, and next year's board will kind of fine tune. That's what I'm assuming, based around what you all agree to on what that process is. But to have that spirit of transparency, and to allow people an opportunity to offer feedback or be engaged in that conversation, I think is important.
Any other questions, comments on recommendation 7?
Yes, I would like to add the piece about the difference around the language of the two as well. The Kensington facility was in such a level of disrepair that that is why we went with that direction. Unlike Alexander, where it may not suit our needs, but somebody else may find a value in that facility and can work it in a way that meets their needs. And it's not in the same level of disrepair. And so that's why we are taking the steps to look at Alexander in a different light, even though it is empty. The facility itself, while it may not meet our needs, someone else may find it to be purposeful. So
Yeah, that still has some community benefit. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Ms. Davis, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that maybe we have to change the language of this. I think that it sounds, I mean, I feel comfortable that there will be a process of deciding what to do with Alexander, that will have lots of input and consideration by the board that's here in 2023. The only issue that I think I could have with this one is if there is community opposition to Kensington without having appropriate time to consider that opposition. Thus, a way to change this, if that's the case, is by changing the language to divesting in Kensington and Alexander in 2023, if we're not at a place to decide quite yet, because that's only a few weeks that we're deciding. I mean, that seems like a big decision to make in a few weeks.
And the way that I'm understanding our process is these are recommendations of kind of the roadmap, so to speak, and then moving into 2023, there will be kind of a little bit more meat added to the bones, and then to make sure that there still is a clear process around transparency, engagement, and feedback and such. So right now, these are recommendations of this is the direction that we think we should go, understanding that there may, with the newly elected board, there may be some tweaking of that.
And that's why I'm raising, that's why I asked the question, does this mean that we're choosing to vote? Because I've seen, and lately, not in years, but I've seen voted for recommendations become, well, you said we could do this. And so I don't want anybody to come to me in March saying, you voted to tear that building down without community input. I'm not going to do that. I will vote for consideration of tearing the building down if there's a community engagement process, and I'm just letting you know what could get in the way of my vote.
That's fair.
So then, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. You're suggesting that.
I'm suggesting that either we have a community process that's transparent by December 5th, or we change the language to include
Yes.
future considerations of community.
Fair enough.
Would it be too far out there to just add a clause at the end of all of these recommendations that says something like, we're voting on these recommendations with the knowledge that continued community input and transparency will affect them moving forward, just a clause at the end?
I mean, we could do that, but I think Dr. Baker's recommendation suffices what we're trying to accomplish here. I think obviously recommendation 4, I believe it was, that talks about the continued engagement, sort of underscores, what you said. I don't know if I want to sort of asterisk it all. That almost seems indecisive, at least from my perspective.
To me, leveling seems a lot more definitive than divesting. Like, well, you're going to level something. I was like, okay, well,
So
that's a clear outcome.
you're saying, can you just reiterate that
I'm saying either we have
in,
a community engagement process by December 5th that's adequate from the community's vantage point, or change the language to make it less
both of them
specific.
are divesting?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that would be one way to do it, even though I agree with Kim that.
Yeah. Gotcha. Ms. Grant?
I hear you, and I'm just thinking about a lot of different angles right now. So I just want to state that I don't know that I quite agree with that yet. So I'm still thinking. Of course, like I always want community input, but I do think when you begin to put this invisible asterisk on the work that we've done, saying that things can be changed, then any of these things can be changed. So I'm thinking, I'm not there yet, but I am, some of these things I do, the work that we've done, I do want to stay in place and people build on top of that. And so if we start saying,
Well, I think
well,
that,
we said this, but if
Yeah.
you guys come up with something better in your mind later,
Yeah.
well, I'm just saying it kind of, to me right now at this point, it kind of opens the door
well,
for
if
that.
I could,
and-
though, I think, and I agree with you as well. I don't think that we would want to put this sort of asterisk on it all, for sure.
Well-
Go ahead, I'm
well,
sorry.
Yeah, if I could finish though,
Yes,
what I was
please.
saying is there is an invisible asterisk in place if we lead kind of in that direction. And so, not saying that I don't, but I see us making
Just
notes to
thinking aloud.
change language, and I just don't know if we've all agreed that we're good with changing that language. Because if we have said that a building is not functional, we cannot continue to pay to keep it up, and we cannot use it, but we want to keep the property and decide how the property best serves that community. That there has been some research and some work done. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I want to make it very clear, and I'm not talking about what we should change, I'm just saying what I would feel comfortable with. But next week is Thanksgiving, and, to make a decision, I don't think that I got anywhere, the people that have come to us about ideas for Kensington, I agree with the assessment of it, but I think to say that we're going to have community engagement and then to make a decision to close a building, to bulldoze a building between Thanksgiving, I mean, I just don't think that we're not going to be viewed as having true community input.
Well, one thing I will say, though, to Ms. Williams' point, that building is in such disrepair, it would take a hefty price tag to make it even.
It's not negating community. Yes, but there's difference between communicating that to the community and asking for input when there aren't options. What are we asking them to input when we don't have options? We can't afford to make that a functional building, and we can't afford to keep paying to upkeep it when it's not functional. So there will be community input on what to do with it once we've created a space that gives us options.
Then it's not community transparency.
I don't agree though, Dr. Baker. I think it's a matter of, there are some things in which we are sharing with the community that we have to, this is something that we have to make a decision on fiscally and be fiscally responsible. We will be engaging them with, again, as she said, around the use of that once we are prepared to go forward. However, I think it is appropriate to advise, but I don't think there should be a whole community engagement piece around what should we do with this now when we don't have an offer for that building at market value, and we can't afford to bring it to the level we need to bring it. And so I think the only language I would be comfortable with changing this, if we had maybe removing leveling, to consider leveling, and or if we received a viable offer. I'm open to a viable offer for that. So because that developer or something of that nature, if we get in some kind of partnership, they may be willing to cover the cost to tear that down, and then that's something that we can look for going forward. However, just to say, now we're going to go into the community and start engaging in depth about this one facility, when in fact we don't have other options at this time.
Yeah, I want to say that to me, it's not transparent to go to the community and ask them what they would like to do when we don't have those options. We don't have resources for those options. So they could say, well, we want to see you build this and do this right now. And then we're like, oh, well, actually, we don't have the funds or the manpower or the resource for that right now. That's what's not transparent to me.
I'm comfortable with the recommendation. based on what Dr. Roby has said, this is a roadmap of what we would like to do. Our best thinking is this. Our assessment of the building is that it's in disrepair and cannot be restored. It would not be fiscally responsible for us to restore it. And allow the community through active engagement, which I think is absolutely necessary, to respond to our recommendation. I mean, the way it's written, I can live with. I think it is the recommendation based on the roadmap, and we need to engage the community for feedback in a transparent manner. And I don't think that we would have difficulty establishing our rationale for the demolition recommendation.
I think we can make that rationale. I just think that if we don't have a community meeting in the Black Hills neighborhood that says we're planning to tear this building down, and this is why, then I can't vote for this. I mean, we cannot treat any community as if they're just going to be told what we've decided and researched is the best option. We know this. I don't know if the community, I've had a general contractor approach me about that building outside of Mulek after the thing, say, I want that building. And I said, you're going to have to wait till December to find out. I don't know what we're thinking about in that building. And so is there an offer? I mean, I don't know if people know, if people have approached me about buildings. I always say to them, we're deciding what to do with our buildings. I don't say call the superintendent and give her an offer because, right? Exactly. So I think that to the extent that we're going to make a decision that it has one finality, and that's leveling this building without having a community forum is just, I think it's irresponsible, and it's gonna set up a situation where the community is not going to expect that we're gonna be transparent on any other decision.
Fair enough. Well, I will say quickly though, Dr. Baker, again, keeping in mind that again, there will be no wrecking balls January 1st. That this is just a recommendation for the next board to work with Dr. Roby and her team to move these things forward. And until that time where there's actually action being taken, the community engagement process will still continue. The community engagement piece was a multi-phase thing. It was the first phase to get this general feedback to identify these recommendations. And then the next phase of communication will be getting response to these recommendations before things are actually, T's crossed and I's dotted to actually move things forward. So I guess what I'm getting at is I think we will have ample opportunity for community folks to respond to this recommendation. But can we be intentional between now and, again, maybe I shouldn't keep using the phrase wrecking ball, but between now and then, will we have opportunity to be intentional with that? Yes, I think we can, and I think we will.
That's why I asked, are we voting?
But it will not be by
to
December
level it,
5th, I would
or are we
think.
voting to level?
Recommend.
Okay, so when I first asked that question, you said we're not saying that wrecking ball is going to show up in January, but if we're voting to recommend leveling it, I can support that. But
So maybe this will help is kind of like an outline.
I'm sorry, Ms.
I'm
Ms.
sorry,
Graham wanted to
sorry.
say
Well,
something.
I think in a way, we've been making a decision about Kensington since 2004 because I think that's when the place closed. And since 2004, every board, including us, has made the decision to just let it sit there.
Well, we made the same decision with Alexander.
To let it, absolutely, and so we're
So,
going,
but we're not voting to level Alexander, and if we did, it would be, the community would be pretty angry, and we would be
Yeah.
very concerned with it.
But again, though, the decision with Alexander versus Kensington is just the level of the condition there's just a disparate conditions between the two for sure. But I think we're all on the same page now. That's the good news, though.
Okay.
We're voting to recommend. Dr. Roby, you were saying?
Over to Erica to kind of walk through the timeline. And again, this is a loose timeline, but to give people a general idea of the thinking behind it. And obviously, as recommendations, however they're managed, massaged, changed, that will impact this timeline. So
Thank you, Dr. Roby, and thank you, board. I know you've worked so hard on this plan through the year, and it's been an honor to be on that journey with you. I wanted to first, Dr. Baker, reaffirm to your point that the press release for the public hearing is going to be going out this week. I think Wednesday, Leon has that scheduled for. And we're going to make sure that there's also targeted invitations to all the emails that we received at the town halls, the lunch and learns, because we did hear a very clear theme about please keep us informed. You know, we want to continue to be involved as you go on. So, but I also think your recommendation actually leads us right to the January through July. So a couple things. We've learned so much, and over 6,000, I don't know where we're standing, Jake, today, but over 6,000 people have responded to the Community and Scholar Survey. Particularly the Scholar Survey is just so beautiful. I actually received feedback from John Hemholt, actually, who said he thought we'd done more scholar engagement in the last 6 months than in the 15 years prior. Just how profound has been to actually see that we've captured this extraordinary voice of our young people. So now it's how do we use that? So I think that's really the first question we need to be thinking about with regard to engagement. How are we making meaning of that information? How is it helping to inform decision-making in the short term and the long term? And how can we get some quick wins? You know, kids have spoken, teachers have spoken, families have spoken, and so we need to listen and respond. So January through July, there's a few things that are happening there. First and foremost for this board, you are going to be establishing a new team. So bringing on that new board and bringing them up to speed on the work that you did throughout this year so that we can honor that work and have that be the foundation that they build on, but also giving them some agency and flexibility in interpreting the policies that you're going to be passing on December 5. So there will be a reconfiguring of the facilities master plan work group to really rethink what does that internal structure need to look like. And then in addition, a whole nother round of stakeholder engagement. And that will be around a couple different things. One, it's really visioning. So it could be with internal stakeholders. I know Dr. Lovelady Mitchell has some, as Dr. Roby alluded to, January planning sessions with instructional leadership to get that next layer of the program consolidations and the academic overlay and have that drive some set of opportunities and what do we call them? They were scenarios. We did some scenario planning. So having some scenarios that you all can look at and respond to in the first quarter. And then along with that, there'll be, I think, more clarity with the next board can actually vote on where they think these school consolidations may be taking place. And then from there, we want to really have a customized, designed experience for those that are going to be most directly impacted by the decisions. And so that may look like high-level macro visioning with system leaders, so bringing some folks together. There's a lot of planning processes happening in this community right now for early childhood, for housing, for green space. So, you know, kind of setting the stage for that, but having some of those conversations so there's more clarity on direction, as well as on the ground meetings in neighborhoods where there's going to be potential impacts, and then the planning process that's happening at the district level. So that's really a threefold: internal, external stakeholder engagement. The hope will be that by summer, spring, summer, but more likely summer, the names would be, the schools would be publicly named. And then there'd be another round of stakeholder conversations, which really would talk about the process. And this is where we may want to really think about what kind of resources could be deployed to support families as they consider options and choices that are out there. As Dr. Roby said, every school, we want to be their choice, an exceptional, high-quality experience, pre-K through 12th grade. And so making sure that that's very intentional, transparent, will be really important. And then moving into late summer and fall, there'll be some ballot proposal work that will be happening, as well as an information advocacy campaign first part of the year, and then moving into more formal campaign late summer. And then with that, we've got just a round 4 here. These are placeholders. There's a lot of opportunity for design still, but what could we do with regard to learning labs, both repurposing existing buildings? So we've heard some terrific feedback. Why don't we bring some folks back and do some design shreds, get some more feedback? But then also, what are some potential reuses for the vacated facilities that could tie some of the work that you all have done this year to more of the system alignment to once those decisions have been made, what is a viable timeline moving forward for some of those transactions and acquisitions? And then continuing on, I think there's 2 more rounds of stakeholder engagement, but we've built it in all the way through. And I think really rethinking even internally for GRPS, what does the ideal structure look like to be able to support this work, because it is a new way of working. And so what does that look like? I think what would be helpful is, as we just had this conversation on one recommendation, what do we mean by community engagement, and being really clear about defining those deliverables. I think there's a partnership. There's got to be internal. We want to support the internal team, and there are going to be opportunities and reasons we need to engage external partners as well. And so I think that that's still unfolding. And one question I would have for you all is how much specificity you want to have on that community engagement plan before you vote, so that you can feel confident making a yes vote.
Well, maybe repeat that that question, please.
So deliverables for community engagement, we had a lot of conversation through this process, and in the end, I think feel really fabulous about the representation we do have, from alumni to scholar voice, but we want to make sure that we're not that we're being inclusive. We're being inclusive in the design process and thinking about how much of that work is outsourced and how much of that is really held by GRPS internally. And I think initially when we met in May, your goal was, let's have an integrated process. You wanted to see community engagement, communications, and facilities master plan really in synchronicity, walking together, informing each other. And at that time chose to keep it all internal. Aside from facilitation, you brought in facilitation, and then Plant Moran Cressa, of course. But wanting just to reassess, is that still the direction you want to take? Or do you want to explore other approaches for how to structure community engagement moving forward? That's a very long answer to your question.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But hoping really to have a conversation and hear your perspectives.
Well, I don't know any, Mr. Go ahead, please.
Well, I think I've been pretty verbal about this along the way. I do believe that we need to seek some outside assistance to engage the communities that are often extremely impacted by our decisions, but maybe don't have the flexibility to work with us and us to be able to reach them in the way we need to. I do believe our scholar voice really lent to the way our numbers look, but I don't think we got that same. I wanted to hear more from parents in that, and not just from our students. I appreciate their voice as well, and I definitely want to acknowledge it, but I think their parents as well needed to dial into that process a bit more, and I don't think that we got that the way I would have hoped. So for me, I am saying that this is we will have to engage our community long-term, not beyond this facilities master plan, and we need to know how to do it better. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that there needs to be someone who has experience in doing that coming alongside our team, so that then they can teach them per se how to get the same type of outcomes, so that we don't necessarily have to hire someone every single time we need to go out and engage the community to get the type of engagement that is robust from these families who often don't tap in. And so that is my perspective. I still believe that that is the case. I don't think, I think while we've done well, I think our student voice changed the dynamics of that more than I would have liked to see. And so I think we need that, that council.
Thank you. Other comments, Dr. Baker?
I would say in terms of community engagement, I think that so far it was great to engage the school communities, teachers, staff, parents. When we're making decisions about buildings, opening schools, closing schools, tearing schools down, we have to be intentional about the community, the organizations that work in the community. So again, just use an example of Kensington and Alexander. Neither one of those are open schools, so we're not going to get the Alexander school community. But there are neighborhood associations, churches, et cetera, that have to be engaged. And so when we get to this spring, summer 2023, publicly naming schools.
Yeah.
And then, of course, these two schools, those, you know, that would have to include other organizations. And, you know, then some people would just come. I mean, you know, when we closed Creston, people came whether we intentionally invited them or not. But the Creston Neighborhood Association is there, and the block clubs and the other people talking about what will it mean for our community. And we changed. I mean, we did things differently than we initially planned. I think that we have to have those. And again, that those are the people who are going to feel left out if we make decisions that impact the community without including them.
And I think that, you know, the job is certainly, it's a sizable job, but it's manageable, you know, to engage a particular neighborhood. If you went to Kensington, it's the Black Hills, it's a very small community. You can walk it and talk it in a day. But if you have community engagement teams that are going door to door or whatever, or even mailing, and then, you know, some small group engagement, you kind of, I think, are able to intercept any negative counter group by telling what our rationale is with the building, and I think a lot of people would receive that well. In the case of Kensington, it's a highly bilingual community, but it's multicultural, and I think that that would help. Same would apply with Alexander. If you truly want to keep the constituency that we have that send their kids happily to our schools, and if they have chosen Grand Rapids Public Schools, then we need to make sure that we keep people happy and that we dissuade people from being counterproductive.
Yeah, I agree with Williams. I think that when GRPS has done its thing internally, it has fallen short. It doesn't go deep enough into community and engagement. And so we do need help and to learn it, as you're saying, so that we can learn how to do it ourselves well, so that we don't have to continue. I've spoken to a lot of principals. They communicate with their constituents all the time. They figured out how to get parent engagement for whatever particular things. So I do think that some kind of roundtable discussion with our principals, because they're working in their niche, as to how do they effectively get the word out for a particular event, issue in their community, similarly in this case with these things. So I think that we need to continue to learn and grow and to be willing to change, uncomfortably so, from our way of doing things. We may have to go door to door or other kinds of things that seems outdated to us now, and it wasn't back in the day. And so I think there's some aspects of change that if we want to win our community back and certainly grow our constituents, we're going to have to do some legwork around those pieces, especially when we're talking about buildings and shifting patterns of where kids go to school and all of that. It's going to be really important if we want to continue to engage and win anew. So.
Any other feedback for Erica?
I would just say, I guess highlighting the fact that
we don't all fit under one umbrella. And so I think I walked back into John kind of touching on this, just going to our leaders and asking, like building principals, where have you had the most success in reaching the most parents, the most families, and how can we tie this into that? Because I think it's probably vastly different from school to school, community to community, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I think that probably brings us to the end of that first agenda item regarding the facilities master plan update.
May I share?
Please.
A couple of things. And so as I'm listening to the comments, and this really is good feedback, but I want to make sure that people do understand some of the things that we have done. And so I think that to the point, there are ways to continually engage and be divergent in our engagement process, but some of the things that have been suggested has been done. Principal, small group, roundtables, having discussions are being very intentional about what are the points where parents are coming in and having that as kind of focus areas. With the lunch and learns, that specifically was designed around various external stakeholders, where we did some of those things with neighborhood groups, private and governmental agencies and such. And so I think to the level, we did not do door knocking, but that's another opportunity of like, how do we continue to expand our reach? But some of the things that have been suggested, so I don't want people to walk away and think that our outreach has not been broad, because it really has been. But to that point, there's always ways to improve. So I don't want anybody to walk away and think, oh, we just only talk with internal stakeholders. We were very deliberate about reaching out to external stakeholders as well, and kind of continuing our reach, and then even kind of planning forward, because what I have heard in these conversations is many of our community members want to build relationships with us long term. And so our goal is, and my goal is, okay, beyond this, how do we start to build or rebuild in some cases relationships with various entities, and to increase kind of that ripple effect. But I do appreciate the feedback. I just didn't want that to go unnoticed.
Right. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. That I guess that moves us to our next agenda item. Thank you, Ms. Vandy. The Innovation Central High update. I don't know.
I'm going to actually ask Alex and Larry and team to come forward. Do you all have a PowerPoint? No? Okay. All right. Lots of different things related to facilities, and so I'll let you all take it over. Julie, do I need to just shut this?
May I ask one question before we get started on this? Was this kind of a surprise to us when this happened? Because, before we started working on Center for Innovation, didn't anybody notice this? I mean, the people who came in and,
This was a surprise.
It was a surprise. Was not anticipated.
I would think all those people that we hired to give us bids and what we have to do, somebody should have noticed it or not. Maybe I'm being naive.
I think I'll pass that technical question to Alex, because he's the architect, but well, I've learned from the best, Dr. Baker. No, just kidding. So good evening, President Ross, who stepped away, but Dr. Roby and other distinguished board members. Just want to briefly update you on the problem that we've facing at Innovation Central High School. This problem came to light on November 4th, late evening of November the 4th, where there was some discussions that we may have a wall that had potential concerns. This is during the ongoing construction and renovation that is occurring at that location. Alex and I conferred on the 4th late that evening, And our desire was to get back in the room with the Rockford Construction as soon as we can on Monday morning to further the conversations. We briefed the superintendent very briefly of what we had. We didn't have a lot of information on the 4th, but we gave her the information that we had. On the 7th, that Monday, we wanted to meet with some structural engineers and some architects to really talk about what the findings and concerns were, realizing that it was going to take a little bit more deep investigating. What we were receiving at this time was the fact that we had the north wall of the auditorium, and the north wall is the wall behind the stage as you walk into the auditorium. That north wall is the east wall and the west wall, and none of those walls are connected to any part of the building. The south wall would be on that second level, which is considered the first floor of the building. So most of the concerns were in the north wall, where we had some columns that appeared to had some rusting because of water penetration over the years into that area. Alex and his team, myself and others, met with Rockford Construction, insisted that they bring in a structural engineer to give us a better understanding of what we were facing. There were some concerns on the 8th. The 8th was not a school day. We had no scholars in the building, but there was concerns that the wall could potentially collapse. We weren't sure that it would collapse at that time, but if they continued to work in that area, there were some concerns. We elected to, working with the superintendent, to cancel school on Wednesday as we continue to meet with architects and structural engineers on site as they investigated. We wanted to come up with a plan, and them and Alex to work with them to get a more detailed plan together in terms of what we're looking at. The 9th and the 10th and 11th were a Thursday and Friday where we went virtual as we just continued to get more information. We were comfortable with the information that we received late Friday. I mean, going into Friday, we just weren't sure if we had enough information to bring our scholars back. But we were very comfortable with the information, engaging. Leon was able to engage a meteorologist for us to give us some additional information. We're comfortable with some of the findings and the data that our structural engineer put together for us to make a decision to bring students back into the building. Alex can talk about the process of shoring up the wall, the timelines, and what needs to happen from this point from a structural and architectural standpoint.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. It is always, when we do renovation work, we have a lot of surprises. And sometimes there are serious like this one. And to answer your question, Mrs. Lewis, part of the scope of the work was doing some tuck pointing, some masonry restoration. And when the contractors were up on the lifts way high in the wall, that's when they were able to see something that you couldn't see from the ground, something you could not see with the naked eye just from the distance. You had to be up close, that the wall had been compromised through the years, and there was a lot of water penetration going through. When they removed some of the bricks, that's when we would discover something that we couldn't see that was inside the wall, which is the steel, the beams and the columns that were rusting away. So the rust was significant enough that raised all the concerns that Mr. Johnson has shared with us. Now, working with the structural engineers, SAI, Mr. Krumke, they have been very methodical at analyzing the process. They have looked into wind conditions, into what sort of forces could create a problem for us, and the stability of the wall. And through their advice, which they have provided to us in writing, is that we were able to identify that it was safe for the students to come back. They gave us some parameters for us to be able to follow and keep the work safe, because it's not only the concern of our students and staff, but also the construction crew. Rockford Construction has installed a local weather station on the roof, so that way we can measure the wind velocity. And the directions from the structural engineers is that if the wind is 25 miles an hour or below, the construction crew is safe to be on site. they will do their normal safety, OSHA-driven work. And if the wind gets to up to 55 miles an hour, which is very unusual, it's not impossible, but it's very unusual, then they recommend that nobody should be around the building. Now, when we talked with the local meteorologist, she explained to us that that type of wind velocity typically, we will know 2 to 3 days in advance because they are connected to storms, serious storms. So, that is something that is a plus for us to be able to predict and identify what it is that we have to do. Now, the structural engineers are right now designing the support, the shoring of the wall. We have approximately another week of design time. Today, I just received some update that some of the loads that we were anticipating are a lot lower than we thought, which is good news. We were anticipating we were going to have to shore also the different roofs, the low roofs were above the mechanical room there, and now we don't have to. So that is good news, and it's moving along. Once the design is completed, Rockford Construction has shared with us that the actual shoring construction will probably take up to 4 weeks. We're hoping that it will be sooner than that, but that's what the calculation is at this point. We, through Rockford, have engaged several vendors, scaffolding companies, and masons and steel companies. Actually, on Monday, my team, Mr. Johnson, I have to give you the information. We're going to go to a local company to see some possibilities for us to rebuild the wall. Because the work that we have to do is we have to take down the wall, brick by brick, and replace the steel with new steel. And once that's in place, then we have to rebuild the wall. So it's pretty extensive work, but the first thing that we're doing is just providing the shoring, which is going to just give us that structural, added structural strength to the wall. The timing of the actual rebuilding of the wall has not been determined yet. We're still doing research. We're still trying to find out what materials we're going to use. We have already addressed the concerns with the historical neighborhood. They are aware. We don't want to upset anybody. But we do have some structural challenges to rebuild it the way it was. We already determined that building codes today would not allow us to build the wall that we have there. So if we're to rebuild this, we will have to beef up the existing structure significantly to be able to carry the load. So we're looking at other options that will be quicker and more affordable, and we're working really hard to make sure that it's going to be meeting the historic significance of the building. We don't want to just come back and do something crazy. So we want to do something that is going to be complementary and is going to be acceptable for the historic community.
So my understanding then, reading these points that I had today, is that this, the school is going to be safe for the kids and the teachers while this work is being done, and so there's no need in the future, unless something else surprises us, but there's no need in the future for the kids to be out of the building or to be on Zoom or anything. We'll just have a regular old school day.
Correct. That is what we're anticipating at this point. Now, you did say something very important. Something else, if something else comes up, we would do our due diligence, because safety of our students, I mean, that, I'll say it goes without saying, but we're going to say that it is the #1 priority for all of us. Our staff, and yes, the construction team too. They're all very important. So yes, if something else comes up, we will work diligently to make sure that it is safe and that we can respond to it quickly in a safe manner.
What about cost?
That we don't know yet. Yes.
Ms. Williams?
Will an RFP be required for these repairs?
At this point, no, we're not doing an RFP. We're working with a team that is in place. Once we design the solution as to what it is, we will have to bid that because it's going to be pretty expensive and we can't just give that to someone. So we will be bidding that portion and bring it to you, of course.
So my thoughts are, so this is the second wall that's fallen since we've done this. So we had a wall fall at Union. And then in another district, Godfrey Lee had a roof cave in a few years ago. It seems like we should not get surprised anymore. So, I mean, I'm looking at this picture on page 4, photo number 3 on page 4. This one here. Yes. This looks like, I try to avoid looking at problems in my house. I don't want to notice that there's a problem.
It's a brick.
But it looks like I would have probably called somebody if I saw that. And it seems like we need to, especially since we're talking about facilities planning, we know the utilization rates. We need to know whether or not any future, especially at this building, are there any other concerns in the building? Because if the girders are, if the steel is resting behind this wall, what about the other walls in the building?
I think Mr. Smart can speak to that because this wall and other walls are constructionally built differently. And so if you want to speak to that.
Yes, that was one of the first questions that we asked the structural engineering team. And the answer is that this is the one and only wall in all of Innovation Central that actually had steel columns and steel beams. The rest of the structure is masonry and concrete. So we do not have, fortunately, we do not have that same fear that there is anything rusting away.
Because I know that there's other, Fountain is right next door, and there's other old buildings in the district.
Yeah. Yes, well, and this is one of the things that we have mentioned during the facilities master plan is that deferred maintenance challenges that the district has. We have a lot of deferred maintenance. We've been kicking things down the road, kicking the can down the road, waiting for funds to be available. And this is an example of that. Now, part of the scope of work was the tuck pointing, which is part of the deferred maintenance. And through doing that is when we discovered the problem. So we will obviously continue to try to maintain the brickwork there. The contractor is still scheduled to continue the work all throughout the building, so.
All right. Any other questions for All right. Well, I guess that brings our agenda to a close for today. Thank you very much.